Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Upside. I'm Jonathan Orleski with JMOR, and this is our virtual show brought to you by the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore and JMOR magazines. If you have questions for today's guests, and they're going to be wonderful, please type them into the Zoom chat or message us via JMOR's Facebook page. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce your host for today, Beth Goldsmith, Chair of the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore, and I'm going to be jumping in and substituting for Dr. Scott Rifkin, the publisher of JMOR, who's off today. Beth, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan, and welcome, everyone. As most of you probably know, today is Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day, when we remember Israel's fallen soldiers and its victims of terror. It's followed by Yom HaTzmaot, Israel Independence Day, which we'll celebrate tomorrow. The link between these 2 days is obvious, for without the sacrifice of those who gave their lives for their country, there would be no Jewish state today. As we honor Israel's fallen and celebrate its 73rd birthday tomorrow, we're excited to be joined today by 2 young Israeli teens who are serving as Shinshinim, Israeli emissaries in our community. Jonathan, would you do the honors?
You bet. Thanks, Beth. So today we are very excited to welcome Noam and Ofir to our show. These 2 teens are part of the Shinshinim program, as Beth said, which is overseen by the Associated Max Center for Jewish Education. Noam comes to us from Haifa, and Ofir is from the urban kibbutz in Sderot. Beth, do you want to start with our first question today?
Okay, great. Well, I guess we should start with basics since everyone doesn't really know what a Shinshinim is. So tell us a little bit about what a Shinshinim is and how you or why you guys decided to become Shinshins in the first place. So Noam, we'll start with you.
So the Shinshinim program in Baltimore, it is a collaboration between the Jewish Agency of Israel, the Associated, and the CJE, where they are bringing graduates from high schools to volunteer in the Jewish community, and we work in different institutes throughout the year and in the community in general. I, for example, work at Or Hadash Academy for most of the week, and on Sundays I join the Har Sinai Oreb Shalom congregation. The reason that I became a Shinshinite is that 5 years ago, my sister was a Shinshinite in Johannesburg in South Africa, and seeing how fun she had and the impact that she had on the community and the impact that the community had on her, I then realized that this is what I want to do when I come to this age in my life. And from that moment, I dedicated everything to be able to experience this amazing experience, and I have no regrets.
Great.
And
Okay.
I decided to become a Shinshin because I fell in love with the idea of meeting a Jewish community abroad, where both me and the community have so much to learn from one another. And I also saw it as an opportunity for me to further explore my Jewish identity. For example, I currently live in the home of a conservative rabbi, which is super interesting. And I'm having such a great time with the kids. It was everything I thought of.
Wonderful. So, I'm curious, tell us a little bit about yourselves and your hometowns. Tell us, give us a sense of what it's like to grow up as an Israeli teen today. Who wants to start?
No one will start.
So I live in Haifa, which is coexistence city. So in my city, you can find Jewish, Arabs, Christians, you can find everything. You can find Baha'i, which is a very special religion that you have only in specific places. So one of them is Haifa, which they have one of the biggest temples, I think, in all of the world. So it's a very coexistent city. And also in the Jewish community, you can find all of the rainbow of Jewish people. You can find conservative, reform, super religious, like Orthodox, and like people who define themselves as atheists and they're nothing, but they're Jewish. So you can find all of that. I grew up in a Orthodox community that is in the middle of an not religious area in Haifa. So all of my friends are very mixed from all of those worlds. I have a really good friend who they believe in Buddhism. So it's very mixed and I love it. Yeah.
Thank you. Ofir, tell us about your hometown and your background.
Right. So I live in a very special place. It's actually inside the city of Sderot, which is a regular city, very close to the on the Gaza Strip, actually. Inside the city, there is a community where I live. It's a very, very small community of only 20 families called the Urban Kibbutz. And this community lives in a sharing way of life so that everybody's living together and sharing their money and most of their things. And so we celebrate holidays together, and we're having Shabbat services together, and we go on community hikes, and it's a very, very special place where we're also involved in many projects that we're doing for the city. And that's where I live with the rest of my age group that I grew up with. And it's also, as I said, very close to the Gaza Strip. So there's also the security situation that sometimes takes place in our lives. But I really love living there, and it's a very special place.
So an urban kibbutz, are there many urban kibbutzim in Israel?
Not at all, actually. It's pretty rare.
Right.
Around 15 currently that are operating. Some.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's what's special about it is that because there's only a few and each work in a kind of like a different way, they know each other. The kibbutzes sometimes do the urban kibbutzes sometimes do shared events, and we're like aware of everything that's going on with them, and we're good friends.
Thank you. Beth? Why don't you jump in?
It's very cool. I have friends who actually do live like that as well. Everyone, it's a kibbutz, and yet they all go off to work in their jobs every day. So it is different than your traditional thought process about that. So tell us, guys, now you've been in the US for a few months. So, which we're so grateful, by the way, because I do know that not every community in the United States was able to welcome Shinshinim this year. So we're very lucky in Baltimore that you were able to come, particularly with, the problems with travel and with COVID. So we're happy to have you here and healthy. And tell us, though, I'm sure you've seen similarities and differences between yourselves and your friends at home and teenagers and the other youth that you're working with here. Tell us what's the same, what's different, how are we different, how are you different?
I can say that yesterday I was sitting with my host sister on the couch in the evening, as we do every evening, and then she put on songs from her phone while she was working and I was working. And then she put on some songs, and every time the song started playing, she was like, "Do you know that song? Like, can you sing it? Do you know the lyrics?" And every time I was like, "Yeah, it's like a very popular song. Of course I know it." And I started singing it. I was just like amazed every time. I was like, "How do you know every song? Like, both English songs and Hebrew songs. Like, how do you do it?" And again, like today I was at school, and one of the students came to me and I was like, "You're not like as Israeli as we thought you were going to be." And I was like, "How do you find someone that is very Israeli? Like, do you expect me to wear like blue and white all the time? Like, what do you mean?" And she was like, "I don't know. You're just very like, things. Like, I don't know." And I think like it's something that like people like that haven't met like a teenage from Israel are surprised to find out that like, well, for at least America, like the USA is like very international. Like we are very influenced by this culture. So like, even though we're very Israeli and I know a lot of Israeli songs and like all of this, and like I celebrate like the Independence Day and Yom HaZikaron and every other day of Israel, I celebrate it as like the most Israeli wearing blue and white. I am also very influenced by this culture. So even though we're very different, we are alike because we have both sides.
Right. I totally agree with what Noam says, and there are many similarities. And when I get to meet teenagers, we connect through sports and other areas of interest that we both have. And it was also a little weird to them to find out that we're Israelis, but still have our similarities. And if I'd if I would point out one thing that's maybe a little different, it really impressed me, was how in here, through my experience of people here in the Jewish community in Baltimore, many people look at Judaism as also a connection to a community, in a sense that might happen and be found in Israel, but I think is a little bit stronger here. And maybe that's because part of what's making them a community is their view and connection to the Judaism. And I just see it as a very special thing, because in Israel, many people, of course, there are people that live like that too, but many people, maybe even secular people in Israel, have a lot of what you find here, like they take it for granted because it's so simple to find a Jewish aspect in your life when you live in Israel, because it's a Jewish country. You don't have public transportation on Saturday, and many other examples. And so it was very interesting to see how this looks like here.
Very interesting. So talk a little bit about, I'm really curious, you're both working with Jewish teens, you're both working with different schools. Talk to us a little bit about, what it is you do during the day and how you interact with Baltimore Jewish teens. I'm just fascinated about that.
So we work at day schools for most of the week. Me and Ofir, if I'm not wrong, we are working with kindergarten to 8th grade. And what me and my partner do in our school is we come into classes and we talk about Israel. We have fun activities. It can be geography about Israel. It can be the culture. We have every Thursday a class that is called Israeli culture, and we just talk about different aspects of Israeli culture. And it can be maybe learn about Hebrew slang and different things, just like a class that will make them feel more connected to Israel in every aspect that there can be.
Great.
Right. We're all teaching about things that are related to Israel, Judaism, Zionism, or anything in between. And I also work with my partner at Netivon and Achshav, which are like programs for high schoolers. And in addition to that, we get to sometimes speak with adult groups, and it's a very, very interesting thing, because we can talk about literally anything through the view of Israel or through our experiences, and the idea is to strengthen the connection between the students or whoever it is that we're talking to and Israel, which already exists. But it's like it works sometimes when you let them see that Israel is not just a concept, but you're actually an Israeli bringing Israeli content, and it suddenly looks like something that they can not only imagine but understand better, and maybe feels a little closer. And sometimes it's just about understanding special things about Israel and why maybe it'll be interesting for them.
Wonderful. Beth?
Yeah, well, so let's talk a little bit about your show. I've heard you guys have a show, a Shinshinim show on Facebook. Will you tell us about it? What's your favorite show? How you put it together, and maybe what's coming up next we can tune into?
Would love to tell you about that. So the Shin Show was an idea of one of the girls in our hub, in our group. When we came, and we were in quarantine, when we just came to Baltimore, she was like, I want this thing. I want us to have a show where we just present to people Israel and different things. It can be through music, through just telling the current events that happen in Israel, through sketches, through everything. I want like everything to be on this show. And we just start working on it, and we're trying to make it as friendly as we can for everyone. Like, we want it to be fun to watch, but like sometimes it needs to be serious. So we're like trying to put everything together. I can say that Ofir is having like an amazing part of it as our main editor, and he's doing a great job. And like everyone are just putting everything into it, because it's just another great way to connect to the whole community, and not just the schools and the institutes that we're working with, but to everyone in like a very friendly and fun way.
Right. We understood that this year might have like it might be important this year to connect to people through social media like YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook. And so we created this show, which is supposed to kind of like let everyone in the community, if they want, see what we're all about and experience Israel, in addition to how we're using it sometimes as an educational tool in our lessons. And it's super fun. Lots of dress ups and jokes and fun stuff, all about teaching, like Noam said, about every aspect of Israel. It could be the history, could be current events, or could be a holiday, anything that's related to Israel, Judaism, Zionism, or everything that we stand for. Yeah.
So, I'm really curious about sitting here watching you. You're both very poised, you're very comfortable, you're very natural, your English is excellent. Tell the audience about kind of what's next for you all. Like, what years are you in high school, if we can get personal? Then when you go back to Israel, will you finish up high school? Will you go to the army? Are you going to go to yeshiva? Are you going to come back to America? What's in your lives for the next 5 to 7 years? Tell us.
So we're both graduated high school.
Okay.
This is the program that you do after you're done with your 12th grade.
Okay. Mazel tov.
Thank you. It was great finishing it.
Yeah.
We are both going to join the army. I guess Ofir would love to tell you about his job in the army. I would love to tell you too, if I knew. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm crossing my fingers to get something good.
What is good? What do you want to do if you had your choice in the army?
My dream thing to do in the army would be international connections. So it would be to work with different army forces and peace organizations and like kind of be the glue between them and the Israeli army. So if there is people who are coming to visit Israel and they need someone to like chaperone them, so that unit would go and like walk with them through Israel and like join them for every like ceremony that they're participating in, stuff like that. So that would be my dream job.
And Noam, is it 3 years of service you have to do at a minimum now?
So for girls, it is 2 years, and for most of the boys, it is 2 years and 8 months.
Wow. Okay.
Right. But this changes because there are so many different jobs in the army, and sometimes girls will do just as much as boys, and you can even continue with extra years that you're taking on yourself. And in general, I also am going to join the army next year after this gap year, and I'm going to be in an elite combat unit in the north called Egoz. And after experiencing this year, I can't really tell you what I'm going to do after the army. I don't even know for how many years I'm going to stay there. At least 3, I can tell you that. But I really think that this year has opened a window of opportunities, and it has been so much fun so far. And it's great that we have that kind of like experience, because it could help us in the future and maybe could come in like useful in our years in the army, even for example, what Noam wants to be.
Very interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, one of my favorite Facebook pages from Israel that I follow is the IDF's Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And I love just seeing all the pictures. So one day maybe we'll see your pictures. They're smiling back at us, from Facebook from Israel. So maybe. So we wish you much success and safety as you transition to the IDF. Beth.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. It's just really. I guess it's been a long time since I've been in Israel. I mean, to me, a long time is it's been 3 years. So I'm hungering to go back to hear you talk about it. So let's talk about what has stood in the way of all of that lately and how COVID has impacted you, Israel, your trip here. You mentioned quarantine. How about your families in Israel and what you'll do when you come back? So, anything COVID related, I'll let you choose what you want to share.
For sure, this year wasn't just a regular year. Just coming into classes and being with masks all the time, and I don't really know like how my students look like. I've never seen their faces. So it definitely has changed everything. I can tell from my own experience that I had COVID during this year, which was really hard to have COVID and not be home, and my mother was worried sick just like calling me every hour of the day. Are you okay? How are your symptoms? Are you feeling better? And like until now, I'm getting calls from her like, of all of your symptoms are gone. Like, how are you? Until now. So it's definitely harder to experience this kind of thing. When we're grown, we're 18, but we're not really. And also I'm the youngest daughter in my family, so like I'm still my parents' baby. So it's definitely harder for them. Um, but having COVID, I just had the amazing chance to see how this community is so loving and how it takes care of me. Like they could have just said like she's in quarantine, we can give her like a credit card maybe, or just like order her food every day, or just like buy her a bunch of groceries and like let her be. But the whole community volunteered to assign themselves to bring me food every night. And there would be someone bringing me food every night and making sure that I'm okay. And for Shabbos, they brought me like a box full of food just for me to have. And there was so many food that I haven't had like half of it because they just brought me like food for like 3, 4 people instead of one. And just like seeing how they took care of me and everything that I needed, I just needed to like one phone call, one text, and like I'd have everything that I need like in 5 minutes. And just I'm not happy that I had COVID, but I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to experience the community in that way. And I think that we saw that from the since the quarantine that we had when we came here, how everyone just wanted to say hi, and like everyone brought us donuts and like bagels and stuff like that, things that we don't usually have in Israel. And they were like, we want to let you experience everything, even though you're in quarantine. Like we were at Pearlstone, which is not very close to anything, but everyone decided that they want to come and like say hello and make sure that we're okay. And if we're missing something, they would just run and give us whatever we need. So I think that through COVID, we had the amazing chance of being like the big hearts that this community has.
Right. I'll also add that working, while a little different than what we're used to, because you have to stay away like 6 feet and have masks all the time, has been for me at least, and I think for the rest of the group from how I got to speak to them, not only okay, but actually pretty great, because it really woke our creativity, and it was a lot of fun. I think specifically in this year where the students themselves have not been in what they're used to for a long time. It's great for them and it's great for us too, and everybody's having a lot of fun because of this opportunity to do something a little different. And regarding Israel, right now most of Israel, actually a little bit, almost everyone, like 70%, I think a little bit more of Israel is vaccinated currently. And we all got our vaccine shots too. And when we just visited Israel not too long ago, we experienced how everything is on its way to getting back to normal. And looking to the future, I hope it'll keep going on this path, and everything will be good. And I also hope this will happen too in the United States as soon as possible.
Noam and Ofir, I'm curious, is this your first time outside of Israel, or have you all traveled around the world and done all sorts of interesting things?
We have all traveled outside of Israel. For me, the longest trip outside of Israel would have been like 14 days maximum. I don't think I've ever been like more than 14 days out of my own home without my parents. So out of Israel as well. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, for me, it's I also have been abroad many times, and I actually got to be in the United States for a month and a half of camp as a camper through this program that my school had for a few years back, and that was
Wonderful. Wonderful. Beth?
You mentioned about being, I think, Noam, you were mentioning that you always wear your blue and white, to celebrate on the Israeli holiday. How are Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaTzmaot celebrated in Israel?
So I just talked about this today with my partner, Noya, from school. That usually on Yom HaZikaron, we would go to 4 different ceremonies in like 2 days, like from evening to the middle of the next day. But here, because of COVID as well, we are going for 2 ceremonies, one that we're doing at school and one that all the Shinshinim are joining tonight. So it has definitely been different. Also, the main thing that at least I'm missing is the siren, the tzfira. So every Yom HaZikaron, we have 2 tzfirot, one at night and one in the morning, which is 2 minutes in total where we just stand and we unite together to remember all of our fallen brothers and sisters. And I really miss this siren during the Holocaust Memorial Day. And I know that I'm going to miss it as well here. And I'm going to try and stand up anyway in the time that they're supposed to be the siren. But I feel like in Israel, because everyone are Jewish and because everyone are celebrating the same things, there is a whole atmosphere of the Holocaust Memorial Day, the Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut. Everyone are celebrating it because everyone are in this together. But in the United States, the whole Jewish community is celebrating it. But around the Jewish community, there are other communities that don't belong to this community and not necessarily celebrating those holidays. So in Israel, just by going to the street, you can feel the atmosphere of those special days. Here, you need to look for it, which is something that I admire about the community because they're not forgetting about those days, even though it is harder to find the connection to them. They're still doing their best to mark them, to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, to remember all of the fallen people, to remember everyone that we lost during the Holocaust. They're doing their best to do it, but it is definitely different from the experience that we have every year in Israel.
I'll add that in Israel, like Noam said, Yom HaZikaron is a day of grief, and that comes like it really is present as TV channels are mostly not operating except for a few that are only showing Yom HaZikaron related content, and radio stations, same thing. And there's school, you don't really go to school that day. You only go for half a day, which is mainly about ceremonies and talking about Yom HaZikaron. And it's this atmosphere that Noam described is really a big thing. And I think all of this, as you explained well in the beginning of this meeting, about how the transition between Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, I think all of this is a big part of what is creating this great happiness in the day after, in Yom HaAtzmaut, because after people have paid their respects and mentioned all that was lost in the way of having the great thing that is Israel today, and you know, the ability to live together in this beautiful country. I think this is what makes Yom HaAtzmaut such a special day, with a huge ceremony that everyone's watching, and everybody goes to the different shows and parties that are happening on Yom HaAtzmaut evening, as everything like the public transportation and the ceremonies and the shows are all for free for all of the citizens of Israel. And there's just great happiness all around. And I think both of these days are so special. And as Noam said, it's going to be interesting and challenging to see how, for the first time in forever, we're going to experience them not in Israel.
So, you know, as we begin to wrap up in the next few minutes, a question for both of you. I mean, what has surprised you the most about the Baltimore Jewish community, about the young adults you've met, about the young students you met? Does anything kind of jump to mind that you're like, wow, that really surprised me?
So on my first week of school, I had this get to know activity, and a part of it was asking questions about Israel and just like saying how many do they know about Israel and stuff like that. And coming to this year, I was like, I'm coming here and I'm going like to help them get to know Israel better and just like let them know about everything that they can, like let them observe everything. And then I came into class, and then at the end of the class, I asked, what would you like to learn about this year? And all of the kids were like, we want to learn about the Kotel, we want to learn about Jerusalem, and we want to learn about Bet HaMikdash. And just for the record, I'm working at Or Hadash, which is an Orthodox faith
Right.
school. And they were like, we want to learn about that and that and that. And I was so amazed about like kids who are first graders, and they basically know more than enough about it, because like they ask like real questions about Bet HaMikdash and like the Kotel. And when we talked about Jerusalem, they were like, oh, that street, and my nana lives in there, and like I visited there, and like they know so much, and I was so surprised by it. And also at that activity, I asked, one of the questions for the kids was, how old is the state of Israel? And then after a long discussion, we realized that it is 72 years old. It was at the beginning of the year. And then one of the kids raised his hand and it was like, the state of Israel is 72 years old, but Israel as itself has been there forever. And I will forever remember this sentence, because this is this second grade year old who just sat there and said like the most amazing sentence that I could ever heard. So every day when we're walking into class, I'm just amazed to see how much they know about Israel, even though they're not like, oh, I know everything about Israel. They really do know a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
To me, it was actually something similar but different, and it's, well, more than surprised, I'd say I was impressed to see how deeply and how truly people here care about Israel, and like how they feel connected, which is what I thought was going to be a challenge to for, you know, I always lived in Israel and it always seemed so obvious, everything that I had, because that's how I grew up. But understanding how like truly people here in the community so far from Israel care about Israel and feel connected to it and feel like it's a part of them, just like what I wanted to try to make them understand. It was so interesting and special to me to realize how connected they're all.
That's great. Super. Super.
So
Beth?
let me ask, I'll let this be the last question unless you guys want to add something that we didn't ask you. But as you think through, and I know you've still got time here, what do you hope to accomplish when you go home? What do you hope you will have accomplished by your time here?
That's a hard question.
Then I'll start. I think it's an ongoing thing, and it has happened and it is happening. But what I really want to go home and be able to say to myself that I did well and that I feel that I fulfilled this goal is not only creating connections between myself as an Israeli to other people, but between Israel. And so that, because I want everyone to understand that everyone in the Jewish community to understand Israel is their home, even if they don't live there. I want to go home and feel like everyone will know that when they get to Israel, I am like a brother to them, and everyone else will accept them just like you know, this thing I just said about them feeling connected to Israel. I want them to understand truly that it's mutual, and that as much as they love Israel, Israel loves them back. And I want them to feel that Israel is not this distant country and not this separated thing from their lives, but rather something that is always there for them if they want it, and that their connections and everything they're learning about it is real and like honest.
Wonderful.
You stole my words. I was just about to say that I would love for the students to feel that as much as they love Israel, Israel loves them back, and that it's always there for them, because it's the state of the Jewish people and it loves every Jewish for their own. And we just want them to feel as connected as they can to Israel, because we believe that this is why we're here, to connect with them and to let them know that Israel loves them, and that's why they sent us here.
What a great way to wrap it up. You know, we call this show The Upside because we really do like to share the upside of things. You two are such shining examples of the upside of what goes on, you know, from your generation to Israel, to all the good things that are brought to our community. So thank you so very much for what you're doing
Wonderful.
here, and particularly for joining us today. Just terrific. And now I'll turn to our audience to remind you that next Wednesday, April 21st, the Associated is hosting a special community event featuring Emmy Award winner and America's Got Talent's most memorable contestant, mentalist Oz Perlman. So if you want more information, go to associated.org/community event to learn more.
Hey, Beth.
And as I'm sorry, yes.
Can I jump in with one event that we just announced?
Yeah,
it's a JMOR event, just add in there. And I'm excited about the Mentalist. That should be a pretty special evening. So on May 4th, after the Upside takes, we begin our summer break, which Beth is going to talk about a little bit. We have a special event at 4:30 that Dr. Scott Rifkin, our publisher, will be hosting. Maryland Member of Congress Jamie Raskin, who has played a big role on Capitol Hill these days. And he'll be talking to us really about kind of the state of our democracy. It's open to the entire community. We just ask you to go to jmoreliving.com to register for it. And we hope to see you all then. So Beth, thank you for letting me interrupt you. And
yeah, no, Jonathan, thanks so much.
I
think it's really important because as we mentioned, I was just going to say last week, we are going to take a summer break. We'll just be doing now 2 more episodes, 2 more weeks in April before we take our summer break. But we will be, this is why every week I suggest that you go to visit associated.org, jmoreliving.com. There's always information and stories and resources for you. And you can sign up for the weekly newsletter, and then you won't miss anything, even though Jonathan or Scott and I won't be here on a weekly basis. Also, reminding you all that these are all taped, our live shows. So if you've missed one, or if you just get lonely for us when we are in our off season, there are reruns available on Facebook, on YouTube, and you can see all the shows that you've missed. So again, thank you so much to our special guests, and thank you to our audience. And we'll hope to see you all next week. And I should say next week, I do know that we're going to be talking with local arts organizations about their plans moving forward. So it'll be another great show. Thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.